so we'll get going. That means that we can share this with people who weren't able to attend. And we have still about 40 people in the main room who are choosing their session. So if we give it about 30 seconds more, and then I will hand over for you to kick off. So as Sam mentioned, today is going to be talking about the literacy group as one of the main areas, but also wanting to feature skills builders. We have Evelyn here to share more about the framework and the work that we're doing cross-sector on skills overall. So hopefully we've got 40 people in here now. I think that's great to kick off. So Charlotte, shall I hand over, or is it Antonia that is kicking off?
I think it's me, and am I sharing the presentation? Yeah, so let me just do that.
If you need a hand, I can also help.
It's not up on my screen.
Great, I'll go ahead and share, and that way you can
sorry.
Okay, so if you want to kick off, and I'll share momentarily.
Okay, so welcome to this session. So what we're going to do today is tell you about how we put the literacy advocacy group together, but we're going to relate that back to the skills building module. So and then we're going to have a bit of time at the end talking about kind of what next and gathering your views around what are effective ways of working together, I guess. So here's your housekeeping notes. Okay, so the next slide is Evelyn is going to talk about the skills builder and how this relates.
Thanks, Antonia. Morning, everyone. I'll keep this super brief. It was really just to set some context around the skills space. So Skills Builder Partnership, we're focused on a set of 8 highly transferable skills that almost anybody needs to do almost anything, whether you're 4 years old and you need to be nice to people in the class, or whether you're an adult who needs to be nice to people at work. About how do you work together, how do you speak to other people, and how do you creatively solve problems. But those highly transferable skills, whilst they're really important, that there's a set of sort of foundational skills that are needed to, interact with the world, and literacy, numeracy, super important for interacting with any aspect of learning or life. And also captured in there, I think it would be important to call out digital skills, where I don't know about you guys, but for myself, the little breakout group we had earlier on, we've sort of focused our conversation around the importance of not only digital skills, but access to digital services too. So the focus of this session is really on literacy as a skill, a repeatable process, something you can do and transfer, but it's useful to think about where literacy as a skill fits in with the wider skills that we need to give young people access to, and crucially build over time so that they can access learning in the classroom and then access opportunities post-16 as well. I briefly mentioned technical skills at the top there, which if we're thinking about young people entering the workforce, there's specific skills that people will need in specific roles, but those essential skills and broader foundational skills are pretty much fundamental to everything. And that's why we're focusing on literacy today. And so I'm going to pass over to my colleagues. If you have any questions for me about Skills Builder, please do let me know and I'll be able to help in the chat.
Okay, so next slide, I think is Chris is going to talk about how literacy relates and the kind of ingredients of the manifesto, I guess.
Thanks, Antonia. Yeah, so we're kind of taking you all the way back, if you like, to the beginning and really thinking about, what is literacy and why is it important, both for child development, but then of course, obviously, for developing a child through education. So we think that literacy is absolutely fundamental to expression. So the ability to articulate our thoughts, our feelings, our ideas, our ability to create relationships, to build an identity for ourselves, and therefore to express our agency. And of course, we know all of those things are really important for well-being and mental health. So that there are additional benefits beyond simply being able to read and write or speak and listen. We also know that comprehension and decision making becomes more and more important as we get older, and as we develop through education in particular, so that we understand both what's going on in the wider world and in our immediate context, but also that we're using those skills to learn and therefore to take some form of action, whether that's writing an exam question or writing a letter, or deciding what you're going to have on a restaurant menu. Then of course there's the sort of the cultural capital side of things, you know, engaging with the key ideas and the thinkers of our age and indeed beyond that, so that children can develop into well-rounded individuals, which again supports those prior points that I made around expression and comprehension. However, what we see in the system are some significant gaps. So we see a narrowing of understanding of literacy. You'll be familiar with the loss, if you like, of speaking and listening as being an essential part of the English assessment due to the changes that have happened over the last 10 years. And we also see that break in the journey through literacy. So the changes from focusing on phonics in Key Stage 1 into needing to quickly pivot to comprehension in Key Stage 2, the change from Key Stage 2 to 3, the change around fiction to non-fiction, and the sort of disciplinary skills that are required by secondary pupils in order to engage with the curriculum content, and yet secondary teachers not necessarily having the skills required to teach literacy. And of course, we see a pervasive lack of achievement in disadvantaged groups. So those children who are eligible for pupil premium funding, but also those children with special educational needs. And that those rates in some instances have been 40% less than their non-disadvantaged, their non-SEND peers. And that's been going on for over a decade. So we believe the solution to these problems is an increased investment in professional development, but also that collaboration both within a school across different faculties for secondary, but across those functions, if you like, regardless of what school you're in. Investment in resources and experiences, and that's certainly something that we know that children have lacked over the COVID period for obvious reasons. But we believe that unless children have that engagement with the more cultural aspects of literacy, working with authors and poets, for example, that they lack some of those key experiences, which again build cultural capital, but really enable them to engage in literacy, stories and literature over and above simply reading a book. And that ultimately what we need is a more holistic and systematic approach to ensuring that regardless of a child is in early years all the way through to Key Stage 4 or 5, that there's a really clear understanding about what are the priorities in terms of literacy across those key stages, and not losing sight of those just because a child's transitioned from early years, that we no longer focus on language because we assume that child has acquired language at sufficient level, that we must continue that journey, that it must be cyclical, and that we're bringing in the wider range of subject matter into literacy rather than it being a pure focus on those sort of functional skills. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have the next slide. I think it's over to me.
Thanks, Charlotte.
Thanks, Chris. So all of this is also founded on what schools were telling us both during and post lockdown. A lot of what Chris said about the social aspects of literacy was really coming into the fore. Teachers were feeling that children were coming back into school, missing that social behaviour that they've had. They'd had parts of it in remote learning on lockdown, but it wasn't the same as working together as a learning community. And lots of schools were saying that children needed that extra support around the social and emotional well-being, including getting back into those school-type routines and those learning behaviours. We saw that there were definite gaps between advantaged and disadvantaged pupils. One of the bits of research that we carried out as an organisation over lockdown was a look at what was happening with reading during lockdown. And one of the striking things that we saw that was access to quality text had been really disproportionate. Strikingly, in our research, the younger the children were, the less access they had to quality text at home. And with Chris saying about that focus on language in the early years, we know that quality text lift children to a level of language that they don't experience in everyday conversation. So that resource gap was really disproportionate for some children. That also included the technology and the support to access and complete remote learning as well. We had lots of schools having real trouble getting those laptops, those devices to the children who really needed them. and also children in multi-family households having to share devices, so not getting as much access to time as children in more affluent households who often had access to laptops of their own. We also know that it's the creative learning approaches that were engaging the children on re-entry to school. Those are often seen as the kind of soft option. Schools were looking at that narrative of the deficit narrative and having to do more phonics and catch up when we come back. But it was actually the creative learning approaches that were engaging the sorts of children who needed it most. Just after lockdown, we had a piece of EEF research come out on our Power of Pictures programme. It went through a randomised control trial, and that actually showed that it was creative learning that was better for the children, particularly on free school meals, and those who were less able to access traditional literacy methods in the classroom who made the most progress in that study. Visual literacy was a real determiner for those children as well. Visual approaches such as looking at picture books, graphic novels, being able to draw as part of the writing process were making a real difference to those children. And they were also investing that want into writing, which made them want to engage in the phonics, the spelling and the grammar to be able to do it properly. The social experiences were really important as well. Things like reading together, being able to have those rich discussions around text. Those are the things that help children to make connections, but also to make sense of some of their experiences during lockdown as well. Well-chosen text where children are able to empathise with characters, allow them to make sense of experiences, to work through things, but also to develop vocabulary and ideas around this as well. And we knew throughout the whole of lockdown what teachers were missing most was the quality CPD. When lockdown hit, we had to shut down our face-to-face training programs across all of our organisations. And we worked really hard to build those remote learning programs that worked for schools. Schools know what they want and they know what they want to rely on. It's things that are evidence-based. It was things that were clear to implement and resource, particularly during lockdown when teachers were so stressed and so strung out with so much other things going on around managing COVID. Those are the things that they knew impacted on engagement and attainment.
Thanks, Charlotte. Okay, so we, as a group of organisations, we, as Charlotte and Chris have said, became increasingly concerned about what had happened over lockdown. And at First Story, for example, we knew as soon as schools reopened, our schools really wanted the writers and artists back in the classroom. It was incredibly important for them. So we knew there was a lot of concern about what was happening to literacy, but what did it mean to catch up for the future, what was needed? So we got a group of organisations around, and one of the things I have learned about the literacy sector and the arts sector over many years of working in it is that there isn't really a collective voice. There's no one lead voice, but there are a lot of people who have a lot of experience and care about it a lot, and have a lot of interesting approaches, but that it's often very, very difficult to have a dialogue around change, which I was very interesting listening to Paul Dressler earlier about how do you kick off that dialogue around change. And so what we realised as a group of 3 organisations is that the best way for us to do that as small organisations was to team up with the Fair Education Alliance and think about a collective approach. So next slide. Hello. Okay, so this is just a quick slide to show how the approach fitted into what Fair Education Alliance were doing based on the work of Skills Builder. And I know we're a bit short of time, so I'm not going to read it out, but we ran a seminar with the Fair Education Alliance in autumn 2020, bringing a group of organisations together, and that formed the Collective Action Group. And what we did was think about what our key messages were, and we started trying to talk to government about it. So next slide, I'll just run through a bit more detail about how we did that. Okay, So, as I was saying, the group of organisations brought with them already a huge richness of research and experience. So we had an evidence base, and we worked together to think about what are the key points that we want to make, which were around what Chris has run through earlier. We wrote to the then Secretary of State, Gavin Williamson, and we wrote to Kevin Collins. And Kevin Collins responded quite positively at the time, but then events overtook us. And I think this is one of the things we want to think about today, is collective action is happening live in quite a kind of difficult political context, and what are the best ways to move forward in those contexts. So events overtook us. Obviously, Kevin Collins resigned, as you all know. He wasn't there anymore to fight our corner. A huge debate around free school meals with Marcus Rashford, etc., in the run-up to Christmas meant that we knew that everybody's focus was on free school meals, and literacy at that point wasn't as centre in everybody's mind, so it wasn't the right time to launch the manifesto. And then as time went on, we also realised or learned, I guess, that although we have the strength of very many voices in a collective action group, you also have the experience of a combination of quite big, powerful organisations who need to talk about themselves and have their own set of relationships, and a lot of smaller organisations who also have their own angles. And so sometimes, although we had a set of key messages, I guess where we are at the moment and what we want to share with you and get your thoughts on really are what do we do next in that context? I think in the breakout group I was in earlier, I think a lot of people feel when they're talking to government, they're talking at a brick wall, and it's very hard to change it, to be frank. And then we've also got everybody's own needs and the emphasis they want to place within a collective action group. But we also do have this very strong set of powerful key messages. So we're at a point in the group where we're thinking, okay, what are the things to do next? And I suppose it's Paul's point that he just said, how do we inspire and mobilise? Maybe we need to think about outrage now. But what we'd like to do now for the rest of the session, and I think we've got 10 minutes, is that right, is hear from you guys. We've got a couple of questions up, which we'll just share briefly, and then we'll maybe go to full screen. So we could have the next slide. Yeah, it would be really interesting to hear from you all, where you have been working collectively, what have been the challenges, and have you got stories or examples of how you overcame them? And I think that will help us think about how do we move the manifesto from a set of statements to something which actually has an impact in terms of action. So can we go back to can we see everybody now?
Yeah.
Okay. Great, thanks. So do people have anything they want to share about challenges of working collectively to make change, or questions or comments about what you've heard so far? But be interesting to share some experience to help the literacy advocacy group think, okay, we've got a manifesto, how are we going to really make change with it?
Great, so if you want, just put up your virtual hand or your real hand. Richard, I can see you there. I'm scrolling between the screens, so why don't you come on? And then we'll go to Joel.
Okay, thank you very much for those interesting introductions. I'm a director, proud to be a director of the FEA, and I've been following these problems that others have been facing, but I haven't been directly involved in working out how to target and where to target. And it just seems to me, in the case of primary schools, that you have an opportunity to influence government, i.e. local government, without having to go through the DFE, and to concentrate on the mechanisms for secondary schools inheriting and trying to cure literacy inadequacy. It just seems that if you don't have a clear target, it is very difficult to get people to use the same language and point in the same direction. So a question I had was whether you had a working model for handling transitional literacy inadequacy. It may be exactly not exactly what you wanted, but that might kick off some thoughts.
Great. So Antonia, did you want to cue them? And just to let you know what's going to happen. So we have a few questions. We had Joel, then we have Jemima, who have raised their hands. We are going to be exited from the breakout rooms, but then put back in for an additional 10 minutes. So we will have 1 minute, 30 seconds. Zoom will do its magic and lift us. But since we started late, we don't want to take away the time. We'll then be put back in. So when you're whisked away in a minute and a half, don't let that bother you. After we answer Richard's question right now, we'll come back, Joel from Book Trust, and then Jemima from the Teaching Schools Hub, I think. But let's come. All right, Antonia, over to you.
So I guess I mean, I think that's a really interesting comment, and that I don't think we do have that transitional model at the moment. I mean, the model is around thinking about the three strands around CPD and around cultural capital. So I think, and certainly I've heard so I think that's a useful thing for us to take away and think about, and might be good to talk to you a bit more about too. I don't know if Charlotte or Chris want to add anything there quickly.
Thanks, Antonia. Yeah, I suppose I mean, it's not much of a reflection, but just thinking, you know, there's a lot of structural there's a big structural change, isn't there, between Key Stage 2 and 3 in particular. And like I said, you know, as I was saying, it's, you know, what a focus of our work, and I know that this is something that you pick up as well, is that, you know, such a fundamental change in terms of the demands on literacy skills, if you like, between Key Stage 2 and 3. You know, the disciplinary aspects of the language in particular, you know, that's, you know, obviously the place to start, but likewise then how that leads to vocabulary and reading and writing. That if there was less of a disruptive change between those two points, that might be an awful lot easier. And of course, we go back to the fact that, you know, secondary teachers are not trained to teach literacy, and like you say, that those children are leaving primary school without the requisite skills. There seems to be, you know, to my mind, there's a lot of structural things that need to be resolved, and that's led by policy, which, you know, one of the things we're trying to change, I suppose.
Great, thanks so much. So if you want to just leave breakout room, that will bring us back in, and then they'll relaunch in the main room, and we'll see you back in here in a few seconds. Sorry about this, but want to make sure we have the full time to do that. Thank you. Great. And thanks, Richard, for your question. So great. Great, so welcome back, everyone. Sorry about that disruption in the breakout rooms, but we have worked it out, the timings, and we're just going to be given the option to rejoin those breakout rooms to continue the discussion for a further few minutes. Then we'll come back and you'll get to choose the next breakout rooms. So what you should have now is an option appearing for a room to join. If you just want to go ahead and choose on that, and we'll see you in there.
If you can't see it, if you click on breakout rooms at the bottom, a box should appear and you can choose wellbeing, skills or attainment. So go back into the room that you were just in. And apologies for this. If you're having problems, you can again put the name of the your name and which one you want to go into in the chat, and we can help you out. But you should be able to see the little breakout room icon at the bottom and choose wellbeing, skills or attainment.
Perfect, welcome back. So Antonia, I'll hand back over to you as people are joining, and we've got over 45. So Joel, do you want to come in with your question?
Yeah, so one thing I was reflecting on was that about working with potential partners and supporters almost like outside of our space and what we do, and just thinking about like overlap of priorities and like learning what chimes with different audiences, and just thinking if you had any reflections on, obviously we have our priorities, and seeing about where we can find that space for overlap with other partners that don't work in this world of literacy and reading.
Amazing. Thanks, Joel. So Antonia, do you want to lead and then Q? And we can almost start this discussion as well. I think if you've got a comment that you want to make in response to this, feel free to come off mute, because it's not just the individuals.
I actually didn't hear enough of that because I came in a bit late. I don't know if Charlotte did, but
I came in about a second before you did, so I probably heard about one more second than you.
Cool, no worries. Joel, do you just want to summarize that about how can we work with individuals who aren't already working within the literacy remit?
Yeah, so exactly that idea of how we can learn what chimes with different audiences outside of, say, literacy and reading, and learning what are the like key messages of what we're looking to do, and finding that like common space to get that support or partnership.
I mean, that's an interesting question, because I partly, I guess it's thinking about what Chris was saying earlier about the whole child and what it, I mean, how it then relates back to business, back to skills, etc. So there are a million kind of ways really that it can, and I think our challenge, to go back to the earlier point, is really to think what are the kind of very key things that we need to focus on, because we know as a group we can't do everything. So it probably is kind of thinking about, here we've got the manifesto, but what are the target points, and then how do they relate out to other sectors, or how do they affect or benefit, how do they involve? I don't know, Charlotte or Chris, if you have a comment on that, or anybody else.
No, I think that's completely true. You know, I think it's about having a real core set of focuses, but then looking at the wider benefits of it, particularly with the work around, as Chris was saying, developing the whole child and creativity, and what that does for children's wider skill set that is beyond that literacy remit as well.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, Charlotte, I think you're right, because I think sometimes, you know, we talk about the impact of, you know, good language, good literacy on mental health, for example, and sometimes I don't think that necessarily people really buy into it, that somehow they think that we're just that's just a hook to sell more courses or whatever it is that we provide as organizations, rather than it being a fundamental and comprehensive approach to making sure that children have the skills they need to kind of weather the storms of life, if you like. Yeah, I think, you know, there's often I think we're very good, aren't we, in education, is putting everything in silos and not necessarily looking across the piece, even though clearly that's the way that your children grow up.
I think some of it is what we mean by literacy as well, because, you know, as Chris was saying, we've got this very narrow view on literacy at the minute. It's all about the phonics, the grammar, and then getting to that GCSE agenda. But if you look at things particularly like the importance of visual literacy at the minute, and how no child is going to be able to be a functioning member of society really without good visual literacy as well. Think about the amount of information kids are getting through memes, through social media. Think about the amount of kids who can't tell real news from fake news. It's all about kind of having a wider development of literacy beyond that very narrow skill set that's perhaps being prioritized at the minute as part of that catch-up agenda.
Yeah, and I think for us it's looking at, is our evaluation good enough to tell us those stories as well, and one of the contributions we can make is to think how we are evaluating our works inside that broader framework.
Yeah.
Do other people have other comments or stories? Yes, I can see Vicky's got her hand up.
Yeah, I think it's really an important question that Joel's asked. So I work for the Country Trust. We're not a literacy organisation. We're in food and farming outdoor education. But a few years ago, we realised that teachers were telling us that coming on a farm visit was getting children talking and they wanted to write. And we got some funding to train all of our coordinators in basically a toolkit to enable them to make the most of language and communication opportunities in the work that we do. And we worked with an educational speech therapist, speech and language therapist for that, because we found that all the resources that were available were all kind of quite high level for kind of debating, and actually we're working with a lot of nursery and key stage 1 and 2 children who don't have very good language grasp of that basic language, like turn taking and learning new vocabulary. So we put together a toolkit which we've delivered to all of our coordinators. And it's an aside, but it's not, it's the bedrock. If they go onto a farm visit and they learn new words, and it's getting them to understand how to ask questions and how to listen and how to use that vocabulary while they're on the farm visit, because we know that when they go home, lots of the children that we work with, no one's asking them, what did you do today? So we're giving them opportunities to talk. So we're very much focusing on oracy rather than literacy. But we know that that's, you can't have, that's the first step, isn't it? So I think it's like Chris said, it's not just being in a silo is no good. It's the bedrock, being able to talk about it. Whether that's talking about what they're doing and the excitement of that, or how that's making them feel, and that emotional literacy. I think if there's some training, I think really basic training, and we'd be really happy to share what we've developed, which I think teachers are telling us that's really helpful.
Thank you so much, Vicky. I'm going to come in there because that's a great offer of support, and Cheyenne's going to capture that. I'd love to get the contributions because we have a few hands up, and in the order they came in, if we can just go, Jemima, if you want to share the question or the comment, then Tim, then Dame Julia, and then Tessa, and we'll see where that takes us. And if you have comments, the chat is fantastic. Thanks.
Thanks, Gina. Thanks, everybody. Really great discussions. I work across 2 organisations. I work across London South Teaching School Hub, but also Charles Dickens Research School. So I've just changed my name there to really just share in response to what Richard said about finding those gateway organisations. So thinking about direct with work with local authorities, to share a project that we're doing at the moment, which is specifically around literacy at transition from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3. And working with the local authority, who've managed to engage 16 out of 18 of their secondary schools on that, as well as a fair old few primary schools. And that's about sharing knowledge as much as anything else, especially where we are in London with so many secondary schools taking from tens of primary schools and vice versa. So it's really hard to build the coherence. But I would say that there are structures there, and one of those structures is the EEF and the Research Schools Network, and sort of using that network as well. Well, you mentioned the power of pictures. We were involved in that as a control group, sadly, just up the road from you, Charlotte, but there we go.
There's more courses coming, Jemima, don't worry.
There'll be loads more. But really sort of thinking, some of this work is happening, and absolutely echo what Richard's saying about getting into local authorities, because it will take forever to get into the DFE.
Great. I can see the timer going down to 11 seconds. Tim, we have yours in there around the collective action and phase model. So key elements, this is going to close in 60 seconds. We have the discussion. Dame Julie, you were after Tim. Do you want to just close us, given your chairing of the National Literacy Trust? And you're just on mute. There we go.
It's been an absolutely fascinating discussion, and I think there's a lot of action and potential collaboration going on here. My point that I was just trying to make is that I think literacy can be seen much too narrowly in education. Not that, there aren't many pressures on us, but all the experience on the literacy hubs in the National Literacy Trust in 14 deprived communities is as important to get bus conductors to understand what the language is that would be helpful to be talking to kids, or barbers in Peterborough really understanding how they can help share their literacy. So I think it's a wide question.
Thank you, and see you in the main room.